talking about 2001's The Others.
The others said they wouldn't, but they did, and then it happened.
This film was directed by
Alejandro Amenabar.
And it's starring Nicole Kidman.
I think it's just fun to see something that's a bit scary.
It is a super fantastic psychological thriller horror film that is really good at creating consistent tension. This movie takes place in the 1940s and takes place on the Channel Islands, and Nicole Kidman plays this character Grace, and her two children are Nicholas and Anne, who are played by James Bentley and Alejandro Amenabar. These children are actually really good actors too, especially considering child actors are usually like, but even particularly Anne's character is so strong, and I think Alejandro really holds her ground in that role.
I told you there was someone in the room, and you punished me. Now I don't know what to say.
I want the truth.
In the film, these children suffer from photosensitivity, meaning that they can never go into any sort of light brighter than a candle dim lamp. If they do go into the light, then their skin will blister, boil, and essentially they will die. Grace's husband has gone off to war and has been missing now for about a year and a half, and she also has these new caretakers that have come to help her take care of the home, when all of a sudden these mysterious beings begin to reveal themselves to Anne. Doors start opening by themselves, and Grace's struggle between reason and faith make her question her sanity and identity. Nicole Kidman does, for real, a really phenomenal job in this role, and in 2002 she received 2 Golden Globe nominations, one being for The Others and the other for Moulin Rouge, which came out the same year, killing it that year. She ended up winning Best Actress, but for Moulin Rouge. So. For me, a standout moment of hers in this film, The Others, is when her husband, Christopher, comes home from the war. You really see a dynamic shift in her character from being originally this really paranoid, strict, religious, uptight, overprotective mother, and you see her just really soften. Her body language is completely different, but when her husband comes home, you really do see a new depth to her character. Most of the hard-heartedness of hers is coming out of grief and loss of her missing husband, and you just really see a shift. Even Nicole Kidman at one point in an interview pointed out the difficult part about her character. She said, quote, "The challenge was making this woman fragile, not a monster. I wanted you to feel her love for her children." And I think that's absolutely true, because really on the surface this character is just kind of a bitch.
Stop breathing.
Once you dig deeper though, you really see that those things are coming out of grief of the situation. Then we have constantly throughout the film, Grace is torn about whether to believe Anne or not. She just doesn't want to and doesn't trust her. And then finally, when she does believe her, the husband comes home and she goes,
But you said that there were.
No, I said that there are no intruders here, and I don't want to hear another word on the subject.
But you said...
No, that is enough.
But it's only at the end of the film that we realize her doubt and struggle is less about believing in ghosts, and it's more about her coming to terms and admitting what she's done. But in the end, we know that the one thing that she knows in her heart she believes is that
I don't know if there even is a limbo, but I do know that I love you.
Despite what's happened. At one point, Kidman quit during rehearsals because she said playing Grace gave her nightmares, and quote, "At one point I didn't want to make the film because I couldn't even go there emotionally, because once you know the ending, it is pretty deep." But to be honest, hearing this quote really surprised me, because if you hear about the work she had to go through with Eyes Wide Shut and Stanley Kubrick, it's like, really, this was too much for you? Like, I don't know, it seems like you really vibed with Alejandro, so, you know, but I guess as a mother, that is a pretty sensitive place to go to. So, Tom Cruise, who was married to Nicole Kidman at the time, was a producer on this film. Now, they ended up getting a divorce actually the week that this movie premiered. So if you even watch some of the premiere shots.
That's Tom Cruise right behind me. We're at the premiere of The Others, and he and Nicole Kidman arrived half an hour apart.
And they're not really seen together, which is kind of awkward. I'm sure that was a very stressful time in her life, but maybe also liberating, if, as you can see from the photos of her leaving their divorce settlement. So I'm really curious how that maybe influenced her character in the filming, because I'm sure that time was so messy, probably internally. Okay, so what has happened? Let's talk about the ending. The first time that I saw this movie, it completely surprised me, took me off guard. I did not see it coming.
Is that how she killed you? With a pillow? I killed my children.
The interesting thing though is that once you know the ending, it makes it totally less scary, because now watching it, I'm honestly not afraid during the movie. But the movie is actually in some ways even more satisfying, because you notice the nuances and subtleties of whether it be conversations between Mrs. Mills and Mr. Tuttle, or whether it be when the husband comes home and the look that he gives her. I interpret that as him knowing that she's dead and what she's done. But the first time you watch it, you go, oh, you know, PTSD, which it's probably some of that too. I think he totally knows, and she's not even aware of it. This film though is definitely very successful at being scary without really having to show a lot. The only two moments that really come to mind as far as being visually scary is probably just the old woman when she is possessing, or I guess you could say the other way around, when Anne is possessing her in the First Communion outfit. Yeah, when the old woman opens the closet, there's really nothing scary happening. And when the suspenseful, what you might think are scary moments are happening, they all take place in the light, which is very contrary to normal horror movies. When things are dark, you can't see what's in the dark, but this is like, it's all taking place in the light. The light is the scary thing. Now, here are just some fun facts for you. Christopher Eccleston, who plays the father, he is actually the 9th Doctor in Doctor Who. My mind exploded when I read that. I was like, oh my god, of course it is. Once I realized, I was like, what the heck? This is an interesting tidbit that writer-director Alejandro Amenabar actually makes a small appearance in the film as one of the dead men in the photographs of the 3 men. He is the one on the far right. The old woman in the film, played by Renee Asherson, was actually quite a renowned actress back in her day, and this was her last film, unfortunately, and she ended up passing away in 2014 at the age of 99. Also, she was like a total babe in her day. So something that I find interesting is that when Anne is on the staircase being punished, forcing to read aloud her Bible, she's reading from Genesis 22:15, and in this passage Abraham is blessed for almost sacrificing his son to prove his faith. I think it's very interesting that she's reading this, obviously, by the ending when this movie was inspired by an 1898 Henry James novella, The Turn of the Screw. Now, as someone who suffers from really bad migraines sometimes as well, I was curious, what were the pills that Mrs. Mills was giving to Grace in the film? There is that moment where Grace is suspicious of Mrs. Mills and like throws him in the sink, but we know later that Mrs. Mills is really there to support and guide Grace. So what were those pills? I looked it up, and at the time, ergot was the first prescription migraine medicine that was around, that came to be in the 1940s. So my guess is that it might be ergot, and ergot is actually still available, but it's only prescribed if acetaminophen or ibuprofen or other things do not work. There are a lot of serious precautions that come with it because it can cause a restriction of blood flow to the body and to the limbs, so there's some really serious side effects that can come with it. But maybe her migraines in general did have something to do with her snapping because of her just being so miserable, because migraines definitely are the worst ever. And lastly, this movie completely blew away the Goyas, the 2002 Goyas, which is the Spanish version of the Oscars, and the others ended up winning for Best Sound, Best Director, and Best Picture. And at the time, The Others was the first film to win the Goyas without having any Spanish dialogue in it, which is very interesting. And this was actually Alejandro Amenabar's first English film. The film also ended up grossing over $200 million, which is still like an all-time high record grossing for a horror film. It's interesting that a lot of horror films get a really bad stigma attached to them and a rap, and so a lot of these intellectual films don't want to put the label horror behind it. They want to call it something else. They want to call it a thriller, a suspense, or whatever, because horror often gets labeled as unintelligent, there being no character development, it just being gore, which I definitely don't think is true. When I first saw this movie, which was probably in like 2006 or 7, I was so obsessed with it for a while. I watched it a bunch of times and I just was very influenced by it in many ways about the way that I watch movies, and pick up on nuances and twists and stuff like that. So yeah, this movie really holds a special place in my heart. If you have not seen the others, definitely go check it out, find it somewhere, rent it, go to your local movie store, whatever, but definitely go watch it. Thanks for watching. Bye.